In the vast expanse of the galaxy, a new power had emerged: humanity. But to the rest of the universe, they were just a curiosity, a species barely out of their solar cradle, tinkering with technology they hardly understood. Humanity's first ventures into space had been clumsy, their ships sluggish, and their tactics rudimentary. To the ancient and powerful alien empires, humans were little more than amusing newcomers. The Galactic Coalition, a formidable alliance of advanced species, saw humans as insignificant, a backward civilization with no place in the grand order of things. Their view was shaped by countless encounters where human ships, underpowered and outmatched, had barely survived skirmishes. Past conflicts had cemented this perception. Whenever humans dared to challenge the might of the Coalition, they were swiftly and effortlessly subdued. It wasn't even a fight, it was a spectacle. The Coalition's ships were sleek, fast, and brimming with technology that far surpassed anything humanity could muster. Their weapon systems were efficient, their tactics flawless. Against such power, human resistance was laughable. Yet humanity had persisted. Despite their losses, they continued to explore, build, and innovate. To the Coalition, this persistence was pointless, a stubborn refusal to accept their place in the universe. To the humans, it was survival, a matter of pride and determination. Little did the Coalition know, the humans had been learning from each engagement, watching, adapting, and quietly building something new. Aboard the command deck of the Coalition's flagship, the VAPORIZED, the mood was one of easy confidence. The vast room was filled with the hum of activity, alien officers manning their stations, scanning the dark void of space. At the center of it all stood Admiral Zardhak, a tall, imposing figure with skin like polished obsidian and eyes that glowed a cold, unfeeling blue. He peered at the holographic display, which showed a single blip drifting slowly through space. A human warship, smaller than the Coalition's massive vessels, and by all appearances, outdated. Zardhak's lips curled into a sneer. "There it is," he said, his voice dripping with disdain. "Another human relic, drifting through space like debris. Do they ever learn?" Laughter echoed around the command deck. The other officers shared his amusement, their eyes glinting with the same arrogance. They had seen these ships before, crude, inefficient vessels that were easy prey for the Coalition's fleet. "Pathetic," one of the officers muttered. "They still use fusion-based thrusters. At this point, I'm convinced they're just testing our patience." Zardhak nodded, leaning back in his command chair. "We've dismantled their fleets before, and each time they return with more of these things. It's almost endearing, their persistence." "Almost." There was more laughter, a ripple of condescending chuckles that filled the room. To the Coalition, the presence of this lone human ship was nothing more than a nuisance, a chance to showcase their superiority once more. Zardhak tapped a few commands on his console, magnifying the image of the human vessel. Its hull was battered, streaked with scorch marks from past battles, and its design was angular, utilitarian, a stark contrast to the sleek, almost organic curves of the Coalition ships. "What's it doing out here all alone?" asked a young officer, his tone curious but still tinged with contempt. "Perhaps it got lost?" More laughter followed, louder this time, as the crew enjoyed the joke. But Zardhak's smile was cold. "Or perhaps it's a desperate attempt to test their luck again. Either way, it won't matter." He turned to his tactical officer, nodding slightly. "Prepare to intercept. We'll rid the sector of this pest." As the command was given, the alien warships moved into formation, their movements precise and coordinated, like predators closing in on wounded prey. They approached the human ship cautiously, though not out of fear but to ensure that it would have no chance of escape. Zardhak watched the holographic display, his fingers drumming idly on the arm of his chair. "They never stood a chance," he mused, as if speaking to himself. "This will be over in minutes." On the human ship, things were much quieter. The crew was small, just a handful of individuals, each manning their stations with an air of calm focus. The ship, named Resolute, cut through space with a slow, deliberate grace. It didn't look like much. It had no imposing turrets, no obvious signs of heavy weaponry. To an outside observer, it was just a relic from a bygone era, a ship that had seen too many battles and was now held together by little more than hope and stubbornness. The captain, a middle-aged woman with sharp eyes and a steady hand, watched the readings on her console. She could see the coalition ships moving closer, a tightening noose around them. "They're here," she said quietly. Her voice was calm, almost serene, as if she had been expecting this. The others on the bridge glanced at her, their faces a mix of anticipation and grim determination. There was no fear, no sign of panic. They had been in this situation before, many times, and they knew what was at stake. "Let them come," she continued, a small smile playing at the corners of her lips. "They think they know us. They think they've seen what we can do. But they've never seen this." The crew exchanged looks, a silent understanding passing between them. They had been preparing for this moment for a long time, and now it was finally here. As the alien ships closed in, the Resolute continued its steady advance, undeterred by the growing threat around it. It didn't speed up, didn't veer off course. It was as if it were daring the coalition to make the first move. On the Wirecath, Zarthak's smile widened. "They're not even trying to run," he said, shaking his head in disbelief. "This will be easier than I thought. Ready the weapons. Let's show them why they don't belong in our galaxy." The order was relayed, and the coalition ships powered up their weapons, a deadly array of energy cannons and missile launchers. The human ship was now surrounded, outnumbered, and outgunned. The trap was set, and all that was left was to spring it. But even as the weapons locked onto their target, the Resolute showed no signs of alarm. Its engines hummed quietly, almost serenely, as if waiting for something. Zarthak's eyes narrowed slightly. "Fire!" he commanded. And with that, the coalition ships unleashed a barrage of energy, a blinding cascade of light that streaked across space toward the human vessel. It was a display of power meant to overwhelm, to crush any hope of resistance. There was no chance for the Resolute to survive. Or so they thought. The alien fleet surged forward, their sleek, dark vessels gliding through the void with precision and speed. They were positioned perfectly, a phalanx of power bristling with weapons, ready to strike. To the coalition, this was routine, a mere exercise. The ships moved as one, in tight formation, closing the distance between themselves and the lone human vessel. They had seen this before, a pitiful attempt by humanity to stand against their might. It was almost boring in its predictability. Admiral Zarthak stood at the center of the command deck, his gaze fixed on the display. The tactical screens showed the Resolute, dwarfed by the massive alien warships surrounding it. He was calm, his expression a blend of confidence and disdain. "Standard attack pattern," he ordered, his voice steady. "Engage at will. Make it quick. We have more important sectors to patrol." His words conveyed his utter indifference, as if this was beneath his attention. Around him, his officers nodded, already calculating how best to finish this encounter swiftly. The alien ships adjusted their positioning, locking onto the human vessel, each movement precise and calculated. The first salvo was unleashed, a barrage of energy bolts and plasma projectiles cutting through space toward the Resolute. On the surface, it seemed like overkill. There was no need for such a show of force against a single, outdated ship. But to the coalition, it was a display of dominance. They wanted to crush any semblance of defiance, to remind humanity of its place. "They've sent a relic to face us," one officer scoffed, watching the streams of light streak toward the human ship. "It'll be vaporized before they even realize what hit them." But as the alien fire approached, the Resolute shifted, a subtle, almost casual maneuver that allowed it to evade the majority of the assault. It was not a dramatic dodge, but a precise adjustment, as if anticipating every shot. Some blasts connected, glancing off its shields, but the damage was minimal. The alien fleet hesitated, momentarily thrown off by the unexpected agility. Zarthak's eyes narrowed. "A lucky move," he muttered, though his tone betrayed a hint of curiosity. "Press the attack. Destroy it." The coalition ships responded, unleashing a second wave of fire, this time coordinating their assault to cover every possible escape vector. It was a tactic designed to overwhelm, to leave no room for evasion. The Resolute responded with a burst of counter-fire, but it was modest, almost understated. Small, targeted shots that struck with precision, yet lacked the firepower to cause any significant damage. To the alien officers, it seemed pathetic, a desperate, feeble attempt to retaliate. "They're barely fighting back," one remarked, shaking his head. "It's like they're not even trying." Yet there was something off, a sense that the human ship wasn't acting out of desperation but intent. It moved methodically, slipping between the coalition's formations, avoiding the heaviest concentration of fire. The alien ships adjusted, tightening their grip, convinced they had it cornered. The Resolute seemed to falter, its shields flickering, as if struggling under the relentless assault. Zardak smirked. "See? They're breaking. Finish it." The fleet pressed in, eager to deliver the final blow. But even as the alien commanders anticipated their victory, the Resolute continued its maneuvers, each turn and twist deliberate. There was a rhythm to its movements, almost like it was leading the coalition ships into position. It was subtle, barely noticeable, but to those watching closely, there was a pattern. The ship wasn't retreating, it was guiding. A quiet confidence radiated from it, contrasting sharply with the growing frustration aboard the alien vessels. Zardak watched, his earlier amusement giving way to a frown. He noticed the movements, the strange precision with which the human ship evaded their attacks. "Something's not right," he said, though he couldn't quite pinpoint what it was. The Resolute was no longer firing back, just maneuvering, almost as if it was biding its time. "Are they trying to lure us?" an officer asked, a trace of unease creeping into his voice. Zardak dismissed it with a wave of his hand. "Impossible. They're just delaying the inevitable." But as the coalition ships pressed in, they began to experience glitches, subtle but unmistakable. Targeting systems faltered, and communication lines crackled with interference. The more they closed in, the more chaotic their systems became. "Status report," Zardak demanded, irritation evident in his tone. "Why aren't they engaging?" His officers scrambled, but the data made no sense. "Interference, sir. Our systems are being disrupted, but there's no source. It's everywhere." The Resolute continued to drift, silent and unthreatening, but it was clear now that it was no mere target. The moment of revelation came when the Resolute altered course, gliding into the middle of the coalition formation. It shouldn't have been possible. By all accounts, it should have been obliterated by now. But there it was, almost daring the alien ships to close in further. And then, a pulse emanated from the ship, a ripple of energy that spread out in all directions. It was faint, almost imperceptible, but it swept through the coalition vessels like a wave. Systems went dark, engines stuttered, and for a brief moment, the once coordinated fleet was plunged into disarray. Zardak's eyes widened. "What is this?" he hissed, struggling to make sense of the readings. "How are they doing this?" He could see the flicker of panic across the faces of his officers, their earlier confidence shattered. "It's a jamming field, sir," one managed to say, his voice tight. "They're disrupting our systems from within. We can't target them accurately." The realization hit hard. The Resolute wasn't just a ship, it was bait, and they had walked right into its trap. As the coalition ships scrambled to regain control, the Resolute began its counterattack. It was precise, surgical. Where the alien fleet had relied on overwhelming force, the human ship's approach was different. It targeted critical systems, disabling weapons arrays, knocking out engines. It didn't need to destroy, it simply rendered its enemies powerless, one by one. The coalition ships found themselves drifting, unable to maneuver, unable to respond. Zardak watched in disbelief as his fleet was systematically picked apart. "Impossible," he muttered, but the evidence was undeniable. The human ship had outplayed them at every turn. And then, the Resolute activated its final weapon. It wasn't the massive, destructive blast the aliens had expected. Instead, it was a pulse, like the earlier one but stronger, focused. It swept across the Coalition fleet, knocking out systems entirely, leaving the ships dead in space. The once imposing armada, which had approached with such confidence, was now motionless, its power stripped away in moments. Silence reigned on the command deck of the VAPORIZED, broken only by the distant, flickering alarms. Zardhak's jaw tightened. "Withdraw," he ordered, his voice lacking the authority it once held. But even as he gave the command, he knew it was futile. The Resolute had anticipated this too, positioning itself perfectly to block any retreat. "We can't, sir," an officer said, his voice barely a whisper. "We're surrounded." It was true. The human ship had maneuvered them into a trap, cutting off every escape route, and now it waited, as if daring them to make one final move. The realization dawned on Zardhak, a slow, bitter understanding that he had underestimated his enemy. They all had. And now, they were paying the price. The Resolute had played the long game, luring them in, using their own arrogance against them. It hadn't needed overwhelming firepower. It had only needed to outthink them, and it had done so flawlessly. The battle was over, not with the blaze of destruction the Coalition had envisioned, but with a quiet, calculated victory. The Resolute hung in the dark, seemingly outnumbered and outmatched, as the Coalition ships closed in. For a moment, the scene was still, as if the universe itself was holding its breath. Then, without warning, the human warship came alive, its hull shimmering, shifting, revealing layers of hidden panels and emitters that had been invisible until now. The transformation was swift and startling. What once looked like an outdated relic now pulsed with energy, sleek and formidable, bristling with weaponry that hadn't been there moments before. Its engines, once a faint glow, now burned bright, radiating a cold blue light that cut through the void. From the bridge of the VAPORIZED, Admiral Zardhak watched, his eyes widening with disbelief. He had seen countless battles, but never had he witnessed such a sudden reversal of fortune. The tactical readouts on his screen began to shift, displaying new, unfamiliar signals. "What is this?" he snarled, as the image of the Resolute sharpened, no longer the harmless blip it had been moments before. The human ship had been hiding its true nature, a wolf in sheep's clothing. "This isn't possible," he muttered, but the proof was right there, unfolding before him. The Resolute surged forward, moving with a speed and agility that belied its earlier appearance. As it approached, energy pulses began to ripple across its hull, building up to a crescendo. Then, in a single, fluid motion, it fired, not just a barrage, but a coordinated assault, beams of concentrated energy lancing out, targeting the Coalition ships with pinpoint accuracy. Where the alien fleet had used brute force, the Resolute's strikes were precise, each shot carefully aimed to exploit weaknesses, targeting weapons systems, propulsion engines, and critical infrastructure. Ships that had been poised for attack suddenly found themselves reeling, their systems failing, unable to respond. Panic began to spread through the ranks of the Coalition fleet. Officers scrambled to understand what was happening, their earlier confidence crumbling as the Resolute darted among them, a blur of motion. The VAPORIZED's bridge was no different. Alarms blared, and the once cocky officers now barked orders with a frantic edge, their voices betraying their fear. Zardhak watched as one ship after another fell silent, their weapons going dark, their engines sputtering out. "How are they doing this?" he demanded, his voice sharp with a mix of anger and fear. No one had an answer. This was a scenario they had never prepared for, and it was clear they were losing control. For the human crew aboard the Resolute, it was a different story. There was no rush, no panic. They moved with calm precision, executing their maneuvers as if this was all part of a rehearsed dance. The captain stood at the center of the bridge, her eyes fixed on the screens, her commands steady and clear. She had known the risks, anticipated the arrogance of the Coalition, and now she was seeing the payoff of all their careful planning. "Activate Phase 2, she said quietly, and the crew moved without hesitation, fingers flying over controls. The Resolute's hull shifted again, deploying a series of projectors that created a web of energy around it, a shimmering shield that absorbed the incoming fire from the remaining Coalition ships. As the projectors activated, the human ship began to pulse, emitting waves of electromagnetic interference that further disrupted the alien fleet's systems. Targeting computers failed, navigation systems glitched, and the coalition ships found themselves firing blindly, their shots going wide or harmlessly dissipating against the human ship's shields. The advantage had shifted, and now it was the coalition that was at a loss, caught in a trap they hadn't even realized was there. Zartak could feel the situation slipping away, and he knew he had to act quickly. "Concentrate all fire on that ship!" he roared, but even as the command was given, he could see it was futile. The Resolute was no longer the prey, it was the predator, and it was tearing through their ranks with ruthless efficiency. As the alien ships tried to regroup, the human warship accelerated, its cannons blazing. One by one, the coalition ships were disabled, their engines cut, their weapons silenced. The Resolute didn't need to destroy them outright. It was dismantling them, stripping away their ability to fight back, leaving them adrift and powerless. On the Warship, the atmosphere was tense, charged with fear and disbelief. This was not how things were supposed to go. They had faced humanity before, defeated them without breaking a sweat. But this time, everything was different. "How did we miss this?" Zartak whispered, watching as his fleet was systematically taken apart. "How could they have hidden this power from us?" He knew the answer, even if he didn't want to admit it: arrogance. They had assumed they were invincible, that humanity was no threat, and now they were paying the price for that mistake. The Resolute moved with a grace that seemed almost effortless, weaving through the debris of the battle, avoiding the few remaining shots from the desperate coalition ships. Its weapons fired in short, controlled bursts, each one striking true. The final ship tried to flee, its engines burning bright, but it was too late. The Resolute caught it in its sights, and with a single, well-placed shot, the ship's engines went dark, leaving it to drift among the wreckage of its fallen comrades. The battle was over, and the silence that followed was deafening. On the human ship's bridge, the crew allowed themselves a moment of quiet satisfaction. They had done it, and they had done it on their terms. The captain took a deep breath, allowing a small smile to tug at her lips. "Good work, everyone," she said, her voice carrying a tone of quiet pride. "Bring us around. Let's finish up here." The Resolute began to circle the disabled coalition ships, scanning them, ensuring that no hidden threats remained. Zartak's voice crackled over the comms, a mix of desperation and disbelief. "This isn't over, human," he said, but even he didn't sound convinced. The captain listened, then leaned forward, her expression calm. "It is over, Admiral. You just haven't accepted it yet." She cut the transmission, and with a nod, the Resolute powered down its weapons, leaving the alien ships to float, defeated. In the aftermath, the wreckage of the battle drifted quietly through space, a testament to a fight that had ended in a way no one had expected. The Resolute moved among the remnants, gathering data, scanning for survivors. It wasn't about gloating, it was about ensuring the message was clear. Humanity had been underestimated, but no more. The Coalition's arrogance had led to their downfall, and the galaxy would remember this lesson. As the human ship prepared to depart, the captain allowed herself one last look at the scene. "They'll be back," one of the crew said, a note of caution in their voice. "They always are." The captain nodded, but her smile didn't fade. "Let them come. We'll be ready." She turned, the view of the silent, defeated fleet shrinking on the screen behind her, a quiet reminder of how far they had come. Humanity had learned, adapted, and now they had shown the galaxy that they were not to be dismissed. The Resolute set a course away from the battleground, leaving the coalition ships behind. It had been a hard-fought victory, but it was theirs, and it was only the beginning. The captain's gaze was steady, focused on the stars ahead. "They thought we were weak," she said, almost to herself. "They were wrong." As the ship sped off into the darkness, there was a sense of anticipation, of something greater yet to come. Humanity had made its mark, and the galaxy would never see them the same way again.